So much. It's a great honor to be here. It's been wonderful to listen to all of the different voices touching on important issues. And thanks so to the Academy, but the Academy is for all you're doing. One thing that has been talked a lot about is dialogue and convening. And so some of us thought we should get cards before the end for those of us who want to stay in touch and chat and figure out how to work together. So Brigitte and I have both volunteered to do that. So we look forward to staying in touch after the meeting to follow up on what we've talked about. We know, we've heard, I've had a long talk, it'll be published, but I think it's more interesting to talk about real world examples of where we are. We know there's a huge funding gap, especially for the Global South on climate, and particularly resilience. We have both a moral and I think a practical security imperative to address it, but the gap is growing every year. You all know that. 2 billion trillion annually is needed, and we're moving in the wrong directions. Particularly small island states, least developed countries are the most vulnerable to climate shocks. They have the weakest balance sheets. We need to address them. And the key is to figure this out at scale. Start with the problem. From my sector, ignoring the public sector, private investors traditionally are beyond cautious when it comes to emerging markets, particularly in not certain areas like solar is an easier thing for people to do. Gina and I talk a lot about solar fixation, but as you've done so well here, water, food, health are all critical aspects, and resilience people perceive as much harder to invest in. I'll give you some examples of how we're addressing it, and I think it can be, but there are challenges, and I don't want to minimize them. Political instability, perceived regulatory risk, currency fluctuations, et cetera. But there are ways to structure around, and folks like the World Bank and the IFC are getting much more creative slowly about helping with currency guarantees and other sorts of guarantee instruments to help with that. And to be clear, speaking as Pegasus, we think there's a huge opportunity. Not only is there a need, but we tell our investors the Global South is going to feed the planet. The Global South is going to solve food and energy problems broadly for the Global North. It's got an advanced young population, which is very entrepreneurial, and critical resources are going to come from the Global South. So there is an opportunity with all those challenges. And I think it's important to realize there are certain situations we'll need philanthropy, we'll need government, but private sector capital, and I'll go through some of the examples, has a huge opportunity. At Pegasus, we manage 3 different projects where we're partnered with the Green Climate Fund. One is something called appropriately the Subnational Climate Fund. I think the emphasis here with mayors and governors is critical. We are broadly a mitigation fund. We can invest in agriculture, we can invest in methane reduction, we can invest in renewables, we can invest in water, waste, but everything we do is not just mitigation. It has to have co-benefits. Absolutely important. Social benefits, community benefits, education benefits. So it's really an ecosystem-based approach. And biodiversity as well. So, and resilience. We don't believe a mitigation fund today can exist. For example, in the Dominican Republic, we're about to launch the first solar project with storage. It's a good project, but the key is it's storage. It guarantees that country will not have to import. We have 2 more coming. So I don't think you can do an energy project today and not speak about resilience as a climate investor. We also have something which is purely adaptation-based, the Global Fund for Coral Reefs. Andrew's foundation we're thankful to be one of our investors, also anchored by the Green Climate Fund. We're partnered here with UNDP, and we're investing in the protection of coral reef ecosystems and coastal communities by working on things. We can't rescue coral reefs if temperature rise goes too high, but we can work with the communities through pollution intervention, sustainable fishing practices, ecotourism, in ways that intervene to help the reefs. So that's something we're very excited about, and it's all about letting these coastal communities survive. The third project is something which is very innovative, where we're partnering with Barbados and the Green Climate Fund to do a blue-green bank, which we're modeling to take to the Pacific. And there it's focused on things like green homes that will withstand hurricanes, electrification of transport, and other investments, including developing insurance products, all around adaptation and resilience. These structures, we heard a little bit about different things. They're largely blended finance, where the Green Climate Fund is essentially is junior capital. We don't think we need it. We are on a mission to make money. We have to scale more capital, as well as have impact. But to encourage investors to come, the Green Climate Fund basically will put up money that's 20% junior capital at risk, or 25% as in the case of the core refund. Some general observations, just listening before I get into just some examples. One, the emphasis on local is so important, not just for governments, as we've talked about in government policies, but resilience. I mean, we've seen in the Ukraine situation with climate shocks, we ship everything all over the world. It makes no sense. If you talk to some big companies and you look through their supply chains, it is crazy. And in part, people talked earlier about extracting. We've lived in an extractive world where countries that produce things, it's taken, they don't have the benefit of, they don't get the processing income, the job income. And I think a major shift, which we're very focused on, working on things like cold chain storage and the like, is to keep production local. Doesn't mean you don't have to export, but the developing world needs to have more of what they produce there and create value for themselves. I think that's a major theme we'll see more of, and it's actually in corporate interest as well. The second theme with resilience, which we invest a lot in, is waste. We throw out, we're a wasteful species, and we can't afford to be. And there is so much opportunity, again, largely local, whether it's in connection with biofuels, as we were just talking about with waste, whether it's for materials, for clothing, or for building structures, animal feed, biofertilizer. There's such an opportunity to use waste better, and we can make money doing that. So we see that as a very important area when we think about resilience. Let's eliminate waste or use the waste. The third comment I would just make generally is 50% of the populations live on coast, maybe more, you all know. Oceans, we have a core reef fund. It's sadly the largest oceans fund in the world, which is ridiculous. We cannot beat climate, so I'd ask you next time to talk, maybe we could dig in more on oceans. Apart from worrying about seawalls, we are going to feed the planet, I believe, deal with carbon capture, produce biofuels, produce all sorts of medicines from the ocean. So that's sort of a soft challenge to the group to put that on the agenda. Next general point is, who is aware? When we say corporations are getting very aware, at least the more enlightened ones. You may have read yesterday about Microsoft and the fact that they're missing their emissions targets by 30%. That's only going to grow given AI. They're all going to have a problem, and they're aware of it. And it's not just an energy problem, it's also a water problem. As AI expands, it's going to create tremendous climate pressures, but it also is going to create tremendous awareness of corporations. Insurance companies, the casualty company, we work a lot with the Insurance Development Forum. They are very aware, and they're addressing it. And I'd say corporations, given things like we've seen with shocks in the cacao business and the cocoa business, you've all seen what happened. It's driving dramatic change in how they're thinking with supply chains, and we're working a lot with them. And for us as investors, that creates opportunity because we have companies like the largest chocolate companies in the world saying, help us diversify our supply chain. They're not doing it, again, to be noble, but if you do it right with them, you can build in multi-crop cultures, not monocultures, create fair income for farmers, and put in fruit trees that feed the local population. We're working, speaking of Brazil, 5 different projects with 3 different cacao companies in Brazil. Last thing I would say, generally, is I think we have to realize we have limited resources and we have to make choices. One of Gina's and my main topics. We don't have limitless renewables. We don't have limitless water. And we can't do everything. So whether, and for me, and we have a water crisis, as you've touched on, I think better than any group I've seen, we're gonna have to figure out, does that go for food? Does it go to make hydrogen? Does that go to produce other things in like microchip factories where we use tons of water to clean? So we're in a situation where governments and companies and communities are going to have to make hard decisions. California, governor spoke beautifully yesterday, but when forest fires go off, 3% of the cars are electric. They tell you not to charge your cars between 4 and 9 last summer. So think about that. We don't have limitless choices. Our resources are limited. So let me quickly give you an example of what we're doing. Cold chain storage in Africa. Huge problem in most of the developing world. So we're starting in Morocco, going to Senegal. We talked about that a little the other day. Morocco is 45% food waste. It's crazy. So we're putting in cold chain storage, some for local consumption, some for export, but also to deal with vaccines. It was, as you know, during COVID, people are trying to deal. We can make money doing that. We need cold chain storage everywhere in the world, particularly, again, in the developing world. We're working, and we're ultimately being Cote d'Ivoire and Tunisia and other places in Africa. In Jamaica, we're taking 500 hectares of land that is abandoned sugar land and planting trees. And it is a resilience project because all the production will stay in Jamaica. I mean, they've got fertile land, but they import to 70, 80% of their food, which is crazy. So, and we'll put in cold chain storage, we'll put in local processing. We're working, this is something Bill Gates has actually talked about, this crop called fonio, but in Africa, Western Africa, we're working with ancient grains that if we can process them correctly are drought resistant, no fertilizer, hypoglycemic, and a combination of fonio, little plug for it to read about it. Carlsberg and Heineken both say it makes great beer mixed in with hops. They said it was better than champagne. We need to do things, and we can make money because where we would invest there is in the processing. Right now, and there's all women farmers, by the way, and it gives them extra income. They just plant it, but today it's manually processed, which makes no sense. So, and it's not economic. So we're working with a big Swiss company, which is known to do this, and there's fonio, by the way, for those of you who don't know it, it tastes great, like couscous, a little nuttier, but it's very nutritious, and it just will add income and resilience for farmers who basically, and as those of you know, West Africa imports rice. Huge import. Again, you think about this crazy supply chain. The horrible, non-nutritious rice, it's whatever they call it, split rice or something. Last one I'd mention is plastics. So we've, as an example, plastics are obviously very destructive. We have an ocean plastic problem. We're working with a company called Parley for the Oceans, you may know, and really trying to roll it out globally to intercept it. At the same time, really try to encourage people not to use it, but then also work, it's mainly women who are the collectors, and the alternative is child labor, which when you hear about plastic recycling in the emerging world, it's normally, if you're making money, it's because it's made with kids collecting. That this company doesn't happen because it has partnerships with folks like Adidas, Christian Dior, et cetera, to resell at a high price, which as consumers, that makes it possible, and their network's going dramatically. So, collaborate, how do we do this, and what's the key? Collaboration, and we've talked about it. We have an extensive partnership with UN Development Program, the Inter-American Institute for Agriculture, Gold Standard. One of the things I'm most happy, we have a partnership with the United Cities and Local Governments of Africa, where they are basically our marketing partner to roll out new technologies as a way to scale. And that gives us, we're about to launch something which is high efficiency, energy efficient alternative to SpaceX in terms of giving high-speed broadband to people in remote areas. And we're starting with 3 cities in Kenya, which they've been our partner to do. And so that's a way to do things. We recently were on a mission to Comoros and Maldives with UNDP as an example, where we are assisting in setting up a strategic plan for the government, which we would invest around energy, power, offshore, for basically small islands who are very hard to finance. So I think there's tremendous opportunity. I'm actually ahead of schedule. So I could keep giving examples. This is what I love talking about, but my main message is it is hard. 2 minutes. One of the things that I'm excited about is the leadership of the church and the moral aspect of this and telling this. We need stories. So why do we do what we do? And we're sort of a pioneer. We invested in sustainability in 2002. We used words like energy volatility, resource scarcity. I couldn't talk climate change. Took a while, 2010. But when we're talking emerging markets now, it's almost the same thing. I mean, there's a certain section, but I think this, and people think if you're somehow doing good, you can't be making money. But I think the ability of the church to convince people of the imperative of it and how it can make sense. Again, in some cases you won't be able to do private finance, but telling the stories and magnifying those stories is really the mission we're on. And we view ourselves as pioneers. That's what the Green Climate Fund said to us, be our pioneer. It's painful at times to be a pioneer. It's also rewarding. So I think working together, collaborating science, social science, faith, and helping people. And the one thing that's missing, which comes through so clearly here, which we also talk often about, is people are missing. And it's part of the problem with, like, people love solar as investors because it doesn't involve people. But what you are all about and what's been so impressive in your conversations today is that it's about people. And it's, as someone who loves animals, it's also about God's biodiversity. But we need to tell those stories and magnify them. And the climate movement as a whole does a very bad job of that. So thank you.